All right. So thanks for joining, everybody. My name is Zach. I run product here at OneSignal. And so basically that means I try and figure out what we can build that's going to be useful to the community to help marketers and developers be able to grow their apps and their businesses by using the tools that we provide. Today, I sort of want to go over a kind of broad level of what in-app messaging is and how it can be useful. And then I want to go through a live demo of a couple of functionalities we have and use cases that can be useful for folks, namely in how you might onboard people to your app with the new user onboarding, how you might use transactional messages to update users, let's say about their order shipping or about something happening in their account, as well as more powerful ways that you can actually use in-app messaging. For instance, to give someone an alert that they got a free life if they hit a particular level of your game, or if they maybe had something left in their shopping cart that they hadn't yet completed. I'll cover reporting briefly, so the data that we provide back from in-app messages, and then I'm happy to field any questions that you guys might have. As a reminder, you can reach out just using the comments option, and that will show up to me, and I'm happy to cover questions as they come up. So really briefly on what in-app messaging lets you do. If you think about wanting to show something to your users, right now, if you want that to work across iOS and Android and show up sort of natively in your app, so not as a push notification, but as something that is visible to everybody who opens your app, today you would have to design that content. You'd have to have an engineer on your team work on coding it up. You'd want to build out logging for it. That would need to get reviewed. You would then submit that to the App Store, and then the user would need to update their app. What in-app messaging lets you do is really quickly go from an idea to having it live in your app. And you'll see how we can do that in even just a couple minutes without having to write any extra code. So this is available today on Android, and if you go update, let's see, OneSignal. Messaging. If you're on Android, you can use that today. We also support it today on Cordova, Xamarin, Corona, and React Native. And so you'll see actually in our documentation here, if you just Google OneSignal documentation, we detail all the platforms that it's available on today. And up in the left here, we have a quick start guide that's a great reference for how to start using in-app messaging. Now you'll see it's supported on Android native and a lot of these other platforms, and we've got iOS native support coming shortly. We'll cover analytics in just a sec. I see Dennis asked a question about Google Analytics. I'll cover that when we get to the analytics section in just a sec. So basically, to use in-app messages in your app, you need to make sure that you've got the OneSignal SDK already in your app. And you'll want to make sure that you pull down the latest version of in-app messages. Sorry, of our SDK. So that's going to be version 3.11.0 or above. Great. Once that's in your app, you can start sending your users in-app messages. What we suggest is updating your app to include the latest version of our SDK. And then after that, after everybody's on the latest version, or after a week or two, so most of your users have upgraded to the latest version, then you start sending in-app messages. That makes sure that you're able to reach the largest number of your users. So I'm going to take a turn and go to a live demo here. So I log into my OneSignal account. And this is exactly what you'll see, or something slightly different when you log into your OneSignal account. And I go to Messages, the Messages tab here. From the Messages tab, I'm going to hit In-App. And this takes me to sort of my overview screen of my in-app messages that I've sent, as well as click-through rates on those things, impressions on those, and a bunch of options to view, edit, pause, clone, delete, and so on. So I'm going to hit new in-app message. And this is really where we're going to spend most of our time today. We're going to go through at least 2 use cases. And if you guys want me to cover any more, let me know. One is like a user onboarding flow. So helping folks understand your app or an in-app promotion. So let's say I am a dog walking service, and I want to let people know that I now offer not just dog walking, but also grooming. So I might select a particular segment of people, not everybody, because let's say I also offer cat care services. So I really just want to target my users who are interested in let's say dogs, for example. So I would select a user tag, which is maybe animal interest is dog. And I'm going to name this segment dog lovers. Great. So that means that instead of reaching my whole user base, I'm only reaching the folks who I think this message is going to be interesting for. I could also decide to exclude folks, let's say people who are really not using my app regularly, because if they haven't used my app in a couple months, maybe I don't want the first thing that they see when they do open the app to be a promotion. So let's say if their last session was greater than, let's say 100 days ago, right? So they haven't been back to my app in 100 days, so 100 days inactive. Cool, so I'm excluding the people who are inactive, and I'm gonna send this to folks who like dogs. Now, I want people to see this when they first open my app. So I have a couple other options if I wanted it to work differently, like only showing it once the app has been open for, let's say, 30 seconds. And I would do that by saying the time, the session duration that they've had the app open is at least 30 seconds. Now, in this case, I want it to show immediately when the app opens. And so I'm going to select on app open. I could also have it trigger when the user takes some action and let's say reaches a certain level, level is 10 as an example in a gaming use case. So here I am and I've defined who I want it to show up to, what trigger, when I want it to show up. Now I'm going to define kind of how I want it to look. So my message name could be dog grooming. And this is a big offering for me. It's a new product that I'm rolling out. And so I want it to take up the full screen. Here I have a lot of information I want to convey. And I also maybe want to include an image. So dog grooming without going anywhere. And I'll format it a little bit. Great. And now, right now, it looks okay, but it's a little bland. So I'm going to add an image. And since I don't have an existing image, I'll just go search for web images and maybe look up dog grooming. This looks cute. And so I'm going to make it a little smaller so that it will fit within this sort of vertical layout. Great. And I'm going to add a button at the bottom, which is schedule appointment. I'm going to have that take folks to my scheduling website, or I could alternatively actually have it fire a action ID. And the way I would do that is I would specify an action ID, which is maybe the grooming page. In my app. And if I want it to dismiss when someone clicks it, I just turn that on, which I would here. And I would use the action IDs if I want not to send someone out to an external website, but actually to a specific place in my app. So for instance, my app would listen for, do I see an action ID where grooming page exists? If so, then I will take them to that page. So now I've got this kind of full screen modal, and I want it to show on the screen until people dismiss it. Right now it looks like it's taking up a little bit too much of the screen, so I'm going to make it a center modal, which makes it look a little tighter. And I'd like to preview it on my device. So I hit preview on device, and I will see a list of all my test devices here that I've configured for my account. Now, if you don't have any test devices configured, you can go add a new user as a test user on the all users page. And the benefit of doing that is it makes it much easier to preview it. If you click one of these buttons, it will then immediately send a push notification to your test device, and you'll be able to see this on your phone. And you'll be able to rotate your phone and make sure that it looks exactly like you want it to. You could send it to a tablet if you had a test device that was a tablet to make sure that it looks great. So now we've got this in-app message, and we want to have it start showing now, and we're going to have it stop showing, let's say a month from now, because we're going to have a different campaign that we want to run at that point. So I'm going to hit confirm, and I'll see sort of some summary information here about who's going to get it. These segments are going to get it. These folks won't get it. It's going to start showing when people open the app, display until someone closes it out, and will run for the next month. So I hit create in-app message, and this will now start showing up for folks. Now, in my case, I didn't actually have any people who were in this dog lovers segment. So I'm going to select all so that you'll be able to see it on my device here. So now I'm going to open my app. I'll quickly turn off screen sharing so that you can see when I open my app, it show up there. So here's my phone. I'm going to open my app. And you'll see, let's see if we can get it to look a little cleaner there. You'll see that this in-app message I created now shows up really nicely without me having to have written any code, without me having to have even involved necessarily a designer on my team to get this out there. I see Dennis asked if we could download the recorded video in the end. We do record the webinars, and so we can post that to YouTube and follow up to folks who attended to be able to watch this later if they'd like. One other great resource actually, and I'll show you right here, is the OneSignal documentation. So if we actually go to OneSignal and we go to in-app messaging Quickstart, you'll see that there's actually an overview video that we've already got there that goes through some of the use cases and that actually will help you on any of the specific steps. So there's a step-by-step walkthrough of what buttons you push to create an in-app message, what each of the fields mean, and any of the options there if you want to do something more sophisticated than what we might be covering today. Great. So we'll go back to one other use case where we're going to extend dog grooming. And we actually could find, let's say, a way to make this look a little bit more interesting. So we're going to edit this and go back to this. And instead of finding the static image, I'm going to go find a dog getting washed GIF. And one of the cool things that OneSignal allows you to do is include GIFs in your in-app messages. So let's see, this one looks pretty cute. So I'm going to find this image. I'm going to actually copy this source. And now I've actually made this a lot more visually interesting. I had confirmed to update my in-app message. And now this will have that level of animation, right? So if you want to have a video or something that looks like a video in your in-app message, you can do that. So I'm going to take a quick look at my analytics here. Here I only sent it to one person, but I will see the number of impressions by platform. I'll see the number of impressions, clicks on the button, clicks on an image, and clicks on the body, each of which can have different destinations. I can look over different periods of time, an hour, a day, or a month. And I can filter by platforms here. I can see what percentage of folks have clicked on one of these things. I can revisit everybody this was sent to and all the details. And I see a nice preview of what my in-app message looks like. If I really like this message, I could go back and create a new message based on it, just by copying it. So that gives you an example of sort of promoting a new product. Let me cover one other use case, which is a little bit more transactional in nature. And just to make it easier, I'm actually going to go over here to all users and add myself as a test device. So I know that I am the most recently active on this. And so I am going to add myself as a test user. And you'll see why this is actually really helpful in just a second. So I've now added myself as a test user. I'm going to go to in-app messaging and create a new in-app message to cover kind of a more transactional use case. I see there's some questions in the chat. Let's see. Okay, lots of enthusiasm from Dennis. Great. So now let me cover a different use case, which is where I want someone to rate my app in the App Store. So I would go in a somewhat similar way and say, I want to find people who are actively using my app in this case. Because if they're actively using my app, they're more likely to probably be positive about it. So maybe I'm going to say their last session was less than 48 hours ago. Great. And I'm going to ask them to come rate in the App Store. Would you give us 5 stars? And maybe I only want folks who we only want folks who maybe are going to be more enthusiastic to go rate our app. And here we don't need it to take up the full screen. You can please help us out. I'll add a little bit of spacing. And where I want to take people to, I see Dennis has a question. Okay, thank you. I guess I was sending folks to Jira. Thank you. Do you guys now see the correct screen? Great. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for raising that. Sorry about that. So you'll see now we've got this in-app message we're creating to try and get people to rate us in the App Store. And I, again, maybe want to make it look a little interesting. I could add a background image to spice it up, or another image here as an example, maybe with 5 stars. And I can crop the image in line here. Great. So now I have created this and I'm going to preview it on my test device. And you'll see I just added myself as a test user here. And I now get a notification that this is available to view on my phone. And so like that, I was able to preview it on my device, make sure it's working the way I want it to. And then if I like the way it looks, I'm just going to confirm and send it out to everybody. Now, in this case, I would actually want to drive people to my app store. So I'd probably go find my Google Play store, and I'd find my I would find my app that I can point people to. So as an example, I can just take this link and drop in the destination for both the 5 stars here, as well as the button. And if I hit preview on test device, because let's say I want to make sure that that actually works, right? That those take you to the right destination. I now see on my phone that this is ready to preview. I get a push notification. And when I click it, I can verify, yes, indeed, this is taking me to the App Store. Someone can rate my app right there. And I've been able to do all of this in, a couple minutes. So I'll pause on that if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to one more use case sort of focused around transactional needs. So for instance, updating somebody about their order or letting them know that a friend has invited them or something like that. I'll quickly take a look at the chat and see if there's any questions here. Great. Okay, so earlier there was a question of if you can put a arbitrary HTML page as the payload here, if you can display any HTML. No, right now we limit it to sort of these sort of primitive components: the button, the image, the background image, as well as your body text. That makes sure that it works really, really quickly. But we'd love to hear feedback from you guys as you're using it, if it'd be really helpful for you to be able to put in arbitrary HTML. And there was a question of if you can test this on localhost. No, so the in-app messages, as well as the push that we send you to preview it on your test device, all those are actually powered through our servers. And so you can't actually preview it without having a connection to the OneSignal servers. And there was one other question about analytics here. Do we need to use Google Analytics? No, you absolutely don't. And I'll show you back here. When we look at the analytics for a push that we've sent, sorry, for an in-app message that we've sent, we're able to see all of the analytics in terms of clicks and how those trend over time and all of that without needing Google Analytics. We also even show you unique people. So for instance, if somebody opened your in-app message, clicked on a button, went back, clicked on an image in the same in-app message, that would be one unique person, but 2 clicks. So it would count towards the click-through rate multiple times, but it wouldn't count to the unique more than once. Let me look at the quick chat. I see we've got a question. Someone can't see my screen. Okay. Oh, okay, great. That was a previous one. There was a question of how to use the web SDK. And right now, this is not supported for web. This is only supported on Android and in about 2 weeks on iOS as well. And so, we'd love to get feedback from you guys. You can email us, support@onesignal.com, if you have a strong use case around web SDK. One thing I will note is that this is available for everybody to use up to 1 live in-app message. If you want to have multiple live in-app messages, you need to be on one of our paid plans, and that will allow you to segment however you want. If you're on the free plan, you can only send a message to all of your users. You can't sub-select it to particular segments of your user base. So typically when we see folks using in-app messages, they usually want to be on a paid plan because that's going to allow them to segment their user base much more finely than if they were sending one message to everybody. I'll cover one other use case here, which is kind of a more transactional one. Let's take maybe an example of a gaming app where I want it to trigger when people are in my app and where they reach, let's say, level 10. And so these in-app triggers can be instantiated from a value in your app. So an example would be if I'm a game, I would just have a level variable and I would update that level, and OneSignal will be able to listen to that trigger that you specify. If that variable was called level, and we saw that its value hit 10, we can key off of that to trigger an in-app message. So let's take a case where I want to say, hey, you made it to level 10, and you're in the top 5%, as an example. I want to, or here's a free life, level 10. We've and if I wanted to make it look a little nicer, maybe I would pull in a emoji here. Great. Okay. I'm not sure if I've got my emoji picker up on my screen right now, but we can say gold coin emoji. Great. And maybe cool. So I only want this to show up for a quick second because it's more transactional in nature, and I just want a user to be aware of this, and I don't necessarily want it to stay on their screen for a long time. So I'm only going to have it show for 10 seconds. And for the top banner and bottom banner, the nice thing is they won't actually interfere with the user's ability to use your app in any of the areas where it's not being shown. So they could still be in the middle of the screen using your app playing the game, and this will show in for 10 seconds, and then it will go away. And let's say I want to make this look even a little nicer. I can go find an image. That I can use as a background. I'll give it just a sec to load. I'll try that again. And I will update my colors so that it's easier to read here on that dark background. Great. And I can easily preview it on my test device. And it shows on my phone. It shows on my phone and will go away after those 10 seconds. And it nicely animates out. I see Vishnu Ravi said, awesome product, by the way. Thanks, Vishnu. And there was a question about using this in an app that requires HIPAA compliance. So we actually don't store any information that's personally identifiable unless you send it to us. So if you sent us data tags to be able to segment a user base, then that's stored, and we can work with you on the best way to make sure that we're not storing any personal information that you wouldn't want stored. You can also effectively just define a set of player IDs that you want to send this to, or a set of users you want to send this to, so that we're not actually storing any of the end user information. There might be a way to get HIPAA compliance there, but our support team can help you work through that. You can email at support@onesignal.com, Vishnu, if you're interested. Cool. So I'll touch on one or two other brief things that are great functionalities of in-app messaging. And you'll see, as we send this out to everybody, that these are actually very powerful because I can start doing things like chaining them back to back. So I could have different user segments, let's say men's fashion and women's fashion, and I could send one in-app message to folks who are interested in men's fashion, one message to folks who are interested in women's fashion, and have that take them to, let's say, different pages within my app. One other really cool use case I want to talk about is how you can effectively be able to use in-app messages for something like reaching folks who don't have push permissions turned on. So if you go to messages and you try and send someone a regular push notification, they need to have push permissions turned on in order to be able to message them. However, if they don't have push permissions turned on, they're not going to be able to get push notifications. Any of your users on your app that have a recent enough version that includes the OneSignal SDK that supports this can get in-app messages. And so it's a great way to be able to reach folks when they do come to your app who might not have push notifications turned on. And let's look at one of those use cases. So let's say I've identified a set of my users who, let's say, turned off their push permissions. So I'm going to look at folks who are not subscribed. And I could export this list to make it a little easier. Give me just a sec. So I'm going to go look at my all users page. And I'm going to look at all these folks who are in my user base, and I'm going to export those users. And what that will do is that will email me a list of all my users. And the reason that's useful is that enables me to then use this parameter for if they're subscribed or not. So let's say I want to target just people who are not subscribed to push notifications. I'm now going to go open this file that I just got, this export. And I will share my screen again. So I have this filter that says subscribed, yes or no. And then I have this player ID here. So I'm going to select just the folks just the player IDs of people who are not subscribed. So I'm going to filter this, sort by column A. And I do have headers. And so this whole list of players are not subscribed. And so I'm going to delete all the people who are subscribed because they already have, I'm already able to reach them by sending them push notifications. And I'm going to export this list of player IDs. So I'm going to hit File, Save As, and I'll just save it to my desktop, and I'll say in-app demo. I think I need to save it as a CSV. Yeah, great. Cool. So now I'm going to go back to my OneSignal dashboard. And I'm going to upload that set of people. And that's going to allow me to reach out to these folks who maybe don't have push enabled with just an in-app message. Hi, Frank. Thanks for joining. Great. So I'm going to go to this users tab, view all users, and I'm going to upload just the set of folks who are not subscribed to push notifications. And I think I'd call that in-app. And it was in my desktop. Great. So here's the set of users. Here's the set of player IDs. It tells me it's successfully detected the player IDs, that there's 36 of them, and I want to select those columns. And I want to create a segment of unsubscribed users. Great. So I confirm and import, and it's now pulling in that set of users, and it's going to create a new segment that I can use to reach them. And you'll see that in just a sec. It will take a minute or so for it to pull that in. But as it's doing that, before I add that as a particular segment, which in a minute or two, oh, it's already here. Great. So unsubscribed users, that segment exists, and it's still pulling in the data for that set of people. And this number will update as it finishes processing that. I will send a in-app message that says, you know, you're missing out. Subscribe to push notifications and never miss a beat. And then since I can't natively ask them for push permissions if they've already turned them off for my app, I actually want to reprompt them of how to do that. So basically what I'm going to do is, you know, let's say iOS push permission. And maybe I'll show them where they go to do that. in settings. And this would be, you know, let's say an example of, I would probably make this look custom for my app, but you can sort of see. Let's save this image, push permission. Go back here, include that image. Push permission. I guess there's some downloads. And so I've sort of said, subscribe to push notifications, never miss a beat. Go to settings to re-enable push permissions for OneSignal. Great. So now I've identified a set of users who are not getting push notifications. I've told them why they may want to resubscribe, and I've told them how to do it. And then I'll maybe add a button that makes it easier for people to dismiss. And again, I want to make sure that this looks nice, so I can preview it on my test device. I get a push notification. Which you can see right here, to let me make sure it looks great. And then I set it live to all my users. So I see there was a question for some folks who might have joined a little later about a notification, about a recording. Yes, we will have a recording that we can share out, and we'll share out to the webinar attendees after. And there is a question, if you can test it on iOS. Yes, you'll be able to test it in exactly the same way on iOS in the next couple of weeks. We're currently finalizing that right now, and that will be shipped to everybody in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully sooner. If I can wrap up the webinar faster, then I'll have a little more time to work on that. Let me go through any other quick questions. And there's one thing I want to share with all of you. It's really special. Folks who have joined for this webinar, and we've got a list because it keeps track of who is joined, will be eligible. You can get a 10% discount on your first year using OneSignal. So if you're in this webinar, if you're listening to me right now, not if you're recorded after the fact, but if you were on the list of attendees who are watching this right now, you can get, watching it now live, I should say, not recorded, you can get a 10% discount on your first year using OneSignal. And you'll notice as you start using in-app messaging, that it's actually really valuable to be able to have more than one in-app message live at a time, which is a paid plan offering. It's also really valuable to be able to use segments to more finely differentiate your users, which is also a paid plan offering. So for folks who only want to upgrade, you get 10% off your first year if you're at this webinar. And the way you can redeem that is you'll just go through our self-serve flow, sign up, you'll see the full price, and then just email us, support@onesignal.com. Again, that's support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, @onesignal.com. And we will apply that 10% from the date that you first signed up for a 1-year period going forward. You can use in-app messages, and you can get started with in-app messages if you're free. Thanks, Andres. I see you're interested in making sure that you get the discount, and we'll jot that down to make sure that happens if you sign up. So you can get started with in-app messages even if you're on a free plan, but you'll be limited to only one live in-app message at a given time, and you'll also be limited to sending to all users rather than being able to send to a specific segment. I also see there's a question from Vale Smith about sending an in-app message as well as a push. I'll tell you what, why don't you go back and we can send out the recording after this. We cover a case where you can make sure that you're not sending a message that will show up both in-app and to push folks by generating a list of who is subscribed to push notifications and excluding those people from when you send an in-app message. So let me jump back to the slides for just a sec, and then I'll cover any final questions that folks might have. Great. So we covered why it's really valuable to use OneSignal's powerful in-app messaging functionality and how it can save you a lot of the engineering time to build, test, set up the right analytics to see a new product walkthrough or user onboarding or promotion manifesting in your app. And that you can actually go from an idea to having it live in your in-app in the span of a couple minutes, as we showed here. In terms of where we're going to go in the future to extend this, this is really where your feedback is helpful. And so, we plan to extend it to give you more flexible formatting options, to let you add, you can already have 3 different tap targets, 3 different places you take folks, but we're going to extend that so that you can do even more. Right now we went through an example of how you can already ask people, who don't have push permission turned on to turn it on. But we're going to try and make that a little easier in the future. And then we'd love to hear feedback from you about if it'd be useful to have kind of an HTML file that you define rather than sort of the more constrained set of things that we initially support. And then finally, we went through an example just now of App Store ratings and how you can actually do that today with the functionality we have. So with that, I'm happy to cover any additional questions folks might have. As a reminder, if you are on this webinar right now and you want to redeem the 10% discount for your first year of using OneSignal, sign up on a paid plan within the next week and email us support@onesignal.com saying that you attended the webinar, and we will apply that 10% credit to your first year retroactively to the date of this webinar. So again, support@onesignal.com, email, say, attended the webinar, want my 10% discount, and we'll apply it to your account. Vale said, I don't want to exclude them, but still don't want to send push in parallel. If you want to send just an in-app, is that possible? Yes, you can send just an in-app message and not send a push if you'd like. That's absolutely possible. And we have 1 vote from Vale for in-app support via our API. So we don't support it today via our API, but we would love to hear from you guys if that is useful. It's certainly something we're thinking about. And I know that we at least have 1 vote from Vail or Vale. And if other folks are interested, please feel free to comment here. Or you, again, can reach out to us, support@onesignal.com, and say, hey, I'd love to have in-app supported via API. Here's how I would use it. And we definitely do take that into account as we're working to build out this next set of functionality. So if there's no other questions, I'll end it there, but I'll give folks a minute or two to drop in any additional questions you might have before we wrap up. Any other questions? Oh, is there a solution for working on apps for Apple TV as well? There is not currently a support for Apple TV. Unlikely that we're going to support Apple TV for in-app messages in the near term. We haven't seen as much demand there, but if you have particular use cases, we're happy to have a conversation with you, Frank. You can reach out, support@onesignal.com, or one of our push strategists can talk to you about what your use case would be. And we do pretty seriously take into account what folks ask for. So if you had a huge app or there were a bunch of other apps that had a similar interest, we're happy to look into that. There's a question for, do in-app messages work, from Robert, for web apps? In-app messages only work for iOS, Android, and then all the wrappers. So Xamarin, React Native, Cordova, Corona, and so on. We have considered supporting it for web, and it sounds like there's some interest there. Generally, though, since you can push a change to your website much more easily than you can push a change to your app, because the apps require App Store approval and people have to re-download them. We focused initially kind of on apps and on the mobile space, more so than on websites. But that's a great idea and is something we're looking into. Someone had asked how they can access the recording. We will send out a email after for folks to be able to access it. If they'd like, they can watch the full recording of this webinar. There was a question, can you define in-app templates and trigger them via the API from JezDeep? We don't currently support using the API to run an in-app message. Again, we shipped this, in the last couple weeks, so we're continuing to build it out. But that's not something we support yet, but would love to hear from you guys if there's a demand there. Someone, Saeed said, with your brand name in the apps. I'm not sure I quite understood Saeed's question, but if you clarify it, happy to answer that. In-app, Vale asked if in-app for Cordova is already available. Yes, on Android, in-app is available already for Cordova. If you just pull the latest version of the SDK, you can use it there. And then the iOS portion of that support will follow in the next couple weeks. Jim had asked about an admin panel where we can send messages to all users. Okay, so Jim seems like most of his users are on the web. We don't currently have support for in-app messaging on web. It's iOS, Android, and then all the wrappers that we support currently. We're considering that in the future if folks ask for it. Let me see if there's any other questions that pop up, either in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll give folks a minute or two, and if there's not any additional questions, we can wrap up this webinar. We'll send out a link to the video recording here. Okay, Jim also wants, okay, so a lot of people want it via the API. Okay, this is great. This is good feedback, and is certainly something we'll think about. Unlikely that we'll have shipped in the next couple of weeks, but certainly something that we'll think about as we're sort of planning our product roadmap. So just to wrap up, in-app messaging, super powerful way to build screens, both for marketing, transactional use cases in your app without having to write any code. And if you do write a little bit of code, you can do even more powerful things like triggering in-apps based on what screen someone is visiting within your app. And for anybody who's part of this webinar, you can get 10% off your first year because we know that once you start using an app, you're probably going to want to be able to have more than one live at a given time. And that's only available on our paid plan. And so you can get your 10% discount for your first year by signing up within the next week, the next 7 days, for a paid plan on OneSignal. And you can just hit the little upgrade button in your dashboard. And then we will apply the 10% discount once you email support@onesignal.com, just saying what your app ID or email address is, and that you attended this webinar. Cool. And then I just want to say thanks to everybody who joined, all 35 of you. There were some great questions, and I'm excited to see how all you folks will use this to build better experiences for your users and to grow your apps. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for using OneSignal. Take care. Bye.